What's up, guys? Welcome back. So, I've been coding for about a decade now, and I've made a lot of rookie mistakes, which is really part of the process with any skill you're trying to learn. But the point is to learn and grow from the mistakes so you don't repeat them again. So, I've constructed a list of 8 common mistakes that either I've made or I've seen other developers make. Some of these are going to be technical, like at the syntax or code level, and some of them will just be bad developer habits. Some of them are going to seem obvious if you're a seasoned developer, or some of them might be things that you're doing and you might not even notice. So number 1 is going to be bad variable naming. This is one of the most common mistakes I see beginners make. Variable names like X and Y are not very useful. Yeah, it's easy when you're typing because it's only one letter, and it might not seem like a big deal, especially in a smaller project. But down the line, code is going to start not making sense. It's going to be less readable and overall just less maintainable. And I know sometimes as a programmer, thinking of a good variable name is like one of the hardest things to do, but it does go a long way. So let's take a look at an example. Say you're trying to get the current X and Y coordinates on a graph. So say we're trying to get the current X position, you could do something like double CXP. So this would be an example of a bad variable name. Now, if I'm looking at this code and I just see CXP, I might not understand what this really is. So something better would be like double cur X pause. You'll probably figure out what this is, but something even better in my opinion would be double, just type it out, current X position. It's a little bit longer, but it's more readable. And I mean, we all have code completion in our text editors anyway, so you're not gonna have to type the whole thing out every time. So what about interviews? Interviews are very time-based. You don't really have time to type really long variable names. And I mean, this one's up to you, but in my opinion, interviews are supposed to demonstrate how you would code in a real setting. So if you're writing unreadable code, obviously that's not gonna look good on you. Now, number 2 might be kind of obvious, but it's not backing up your code and not using source control. There's really no excuse for this one, maybe unless you're working on like a really small basic throwaway app. But for starters, it's good practice and it's good to get in the habit of using source control. Whether it's Git or Subversion, Git is by far the most popular tool. You can run Git on the command line, or there's also a lot of good UI tools out there. Like I use Fork, SourceTree is good. I heard Git Kraken is good as well, but I've never used it. So using version control also isn't enough because that's just local to your machine. So if your hard drive ever fails or someone steals your laptop, you basically lose all your work. So you also want to store your code on some kind of remote repository. GitHub is a popular one. Bitbucket is also popular. All right, the third common mistake is to have inconsistent code formatting. Now, whether it's multiple developers working on the same project or just you, the code should be consistent throughout your repository. Otherwise, your code is going to look amateurish and it's going to reduce its readability. So for example, we have 2 methods here. The first one has the curly brace on the same line as the method name. The second one has the curly brace on a new line. Now, there is some debate on which one you should use. Sometimes it's preference, but a lot of times you're going to want to use the standard either naming conventions or formatting of the language that you're in. So if you're using something like .NET, they recommend that you have the curly brace on a new line. But if you're using something like Java, they recommend that you have it on the same line as the method name. So if you're ever in doubt, there is official documentation on most languages that you could look up. If you're working in a project and it's already not using the correct formatting, I would just stick to what the project is already using just to keep things more consistent. All right, number 4 is going to be adding code that you might use later. I see this one all the time, and this one might be controversial, but not in my opinion. Say you have a requirement to insert a record into a database. So you write your method, but then you're like, hey, maybe down the line, we'll need to have a way to delete this record or update it. So you'll write extra code for that functionality that's not being currently used. And most of the time, you don't ever end up using that functionality. So it's just sitting there as dead code, cluttering your code base. And future developers are going to see that and they're going to be like, well, I don't think we're ever using it, but most people are going to be too scared to delete code when they don't really know why it's there in the first place. And it just ends up being confusing. So in my experience, it's better just to implement what you need now. And if you ever do need that additional functionality down the line, we'll just write it down the line. All right, that leads us to our question of the day, which is going to be, what is a common mistake that you've made or suggestions you would make to beginner developers? Let me know in the comments. Number 5 is getting stuck in tutorial hell. Tutorial hell is when you're continuously watching tutorial after tutorial, but you never really feel like you're ready to take off those training wheels and start developing on your own. It happens a lot to new developers because you don't really know where to start. So you're like, oh, let me take this JavaScript tutorial. Oh, but now I also heard React is good, so let me take a tutorial on that. Oh, but now I want to learn backend development, so let me look into Node. But oh, I also want to write into a database, so let me take a SQL course. And then you build up this never-ending backlog of videos, because nowadays tutorials are like 10 to like, I've seen some of like 40 or 50 hours each. And it gets kind of overwhelming. It's like when people keep recommending new TV shows to you, and you're like, I'm never going to get to all these. But the truth is, until you actually start applying your skills and start making mistakes and learning from them, you're never going to really be able to take that next step. You don't really need to know the ins and outs of a language before starting it. You really just need like a good foundation from it, and then you can learn as you go. It's like if you're trying to become a basketball player, you're not going to become great by just watching people on TV. You're going to have to actually go out there and play to get better. Number 6 is going to be not testing your code often. There are so many times where I'll be wired in, I'll be in the zone, I'll be coding, and then I go to run my code and there are like 12 errors and 18 warnings. And you're like, oh crap, where did I mess up? But then you can't find where you mess up, so you have to go back and start deleting your code and running it again, and it just becomes a pain in the neck. So the way that you should go about it is make a few changes, run your code, make sure it looks good. Make a few changes, run your code, make sure it looks good, and so on. In the long run, you're going to be writing more error-free code, and it's just going to save you a lot of time on debugging. Number 7 is having magic numbers and strings in your code. A magic number is a direct usage of a number. A magic string is the same thing, but with text. So again, it makes your code less readable. It could lead to potential bugs, much like when we talked about bad variable names. So an example of a magic number is going to be an if-else statement here. Say if foo equals 3, add user, else if foo equals 4, update user. So again, this 3 and 4 are magic numbers because they're just kind of there. They don't really have any meaning. So a better way to do this is to put this 3 into a variable. So up here, we could do something like public static final int add user equals 3. Now, if I know that this is never going to change, it is good practice to make it final. And if it is final, it's usually going to be in capital letters. So now instead of having if foo equals 3, we could have if foo equals add user, then add user. Likewise, if foo equals update user, then update the user. And this is also good practice because say you have that 3 multiple times in your code. If you ever change it, you're going to have to change it in every spot. But now all you would need to do is you would need to go up here and change it in the variable, and it's changed everywhere. All right, finally, we have number 8, which is commenting out blocks of code. There's almost never a good reason to do this, but I see it all the time, even at the professional level. And it ends up just being confusing. Like why is this commented out code even still in the code? It's usually commented out because you're like, oh, we might need to use this later, but again, never ends up being used and just ends up cluttering everything. And also, like I said, your code should be in source control. So if you ever do need to go back and look at previous code, you can just go look at previous versions. All right, so there you have it, 8 common coding mistakes. I actually made a longer list of these. So if this video does well, I'll definitely be making a part 2. So make sure you like the video and comment if that's something you'd like to see. Thank you so much for watching. And as always, keep on coding.